Welcome back to the Grep News Podcast. I'm Bam Rather, and our show today is about how the Federal Reserve's independence is under attack, with explosive allegations that the Trump administration is turning the Justice Department into a tool to pressure America's central bank. There's a particular kind of silence that descends over financial markets when something fundamental breaks. Not the panic of a crash, that's loud, chaotic, almost cathartic. No, this is different. This is the silence of recalibration, when traders and central bankers and finance ministers around the world simultaneously realize that rules they thought were inviolable might not be rules at all. That silence arrived this past weekend. On Friday evening, the Justice Department served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas. By Sunday, Fed Chair Jerome Powell released a video statement with the careful diction of someone who knows every word will be parsed by prosecutors. And by Monday morning in Asia, the dollar was selling off, gold was hitting record highs, and the global financial system was quietly asking itself a question it hasn't had to ask in generations. What happens when the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve becomes negotiable? Let me walk you through what we know, and more importantly, what we don't. The investigation centers on the Fed's headquarters renovation. The Mariner S. Eccles building, constructed in the 1930s, hasn't been comprehensively updated since. Asbestos, lead contamination, outdated electrical systems, the kind of infrastructure decay that happens when you defer maintenance for nearly a century. The project started back with an estimated cost of $1.9 billion. Current estimates put it at nearly $2.5 billion. That's roughly $500 to $700 million over budget, scheduled for completion next year. So, pretty much like every construction project ever. Now, here's where the story splits. According to Trump administration officials, specifically Bill Pulte at the Federal Housing Finance Agency and Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget, Powell mismanaged this project and misrepresented its costs to Congress. When Trump visited the Fed last July to inspect renovations, he claimed costs had reached $3.1 billion. Powell corrected him publicly, explaining that figure included a separate building completed years earlier, the kind of correction that, in another administration, might have been a footnote. In this one, it became a catalyst. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, Trump appointee, former Fox News host, approved the investigation. 3 months later, those subpoenas arrived. Powell's response was methodical, almost architectural in its construction. He acknowledged the investigation exists, confirmed the Fed has cooperated fully, then pivoted to what he clearly believes is the actual story. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. Read that again. Powell isn't just defending himself against allegations of mismanagement. He's framing this as an existential threat to central bank independence. The principle that monetary policy should be insulated from political pressure, that interest rates should reflect economic conditions rather than presidential preferences. And he's got receipts. Trump has waged a year-long campaign pressuring the Fed to cut rates. He's publicly insulted Powell, suggested he could fire or sue him, told Politico last month he'd judge Powell's successor on their willingness to cut rates immediately. Just last week, Trump told reporters he's decided on Powell's replacement but hasn't revealed the name. Powell's term as chair expires in May, 4 months from now. When NBC asked Trump about the investigation on Sunday, he said, "I don't know anything about it, but he's certainly not very good at the Fed, and he's not very good at building buildings." Then, when asked if the subpoenas related to interest rates, Trump said, "No, I wouldn't even think of doing it that way. What should pressure him is the fact that rates are far too high." Notice the rhetorical sleight of hand there? Deny the connection, then immediately reassert the pressure. It's like saying, "I would never threaten you," while sharpening a knife. Now, let's talk about what the investigation actually alleges, because this is where things get murky. The specific potential crimes haven't been disclosed. The evidence that prompted Pirro to approve the investigation hasn't been made public. What we know is that prosecutors are examining spending records and Powell's public statements, presumably his congressional testimony. The Fed published detailed documentation, including a virtual tour with annotations confirming Powell's version. No new VIP dining room, no VIP elevator, no new water features. The roof terraces Trump allies criticized? Green roofs for stormwater management, similar to those on other federal buildings, including, and I love this detail, the Department of Justice itself. You know, the same DOJ that's now investigating the Fed for having similar green roofs.
My name is Tom Sachs. I'm an artist in New York City. For nearly 2 decades, I have been collaborating with Nike.
Nike running is for runners. Nike basketball is for basketball. Nike craft is for everyone else.
An initial proposal apparently included some luxury features, but Powell testified under oath that those didn't make it into the final plan. The question prosecutors are presumably asking, did he lie? Here's what nobody's reporting, though. No sources provide comparative analysis of these costs against other major federal renovation projects. No independent construction experts are quoted. No constitutional law scholars specializing in Federal Reserve independence. No Fed employees speaking anonymously about actual waste or mismanagement. The investigation appears driven entirely by external political actors who have been publicly critical of Powell for months, primarily over interest rates, secondarily over renovations. And this isn't happening in isolation. The Trump Justice Department has initiated investigations into multiple political adversaries. A federal judge threw out indictments against James Comey and Letitia James, ruling that the prosecutor had been unlawfully appointed. DOJ opened an investigation into Senator Adam Schiff over mortgage fraud allegations that haven't yielded sufficient evidence to present to a grand jury. Trump attempted to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook. A federal judge temporarily blocked the removal, and the Supreme Court will hear arguments in her case on January 21st, 9 days from now. There's a pattern here, and the pattern suggests this isn't really about asbestos abatement and cost overruns. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, seems to think so. He's a banking committee member, retiring at the end of his term, which gives him a particular kind of freedom. On Sunday, he vowed to oppose all Fed nominations until this investigation is resolved. His statement was unequivocal. If there were any remaining doubt whether advisors within the Trump administration are actively pushing to end the independence of the Federal Reserve, there should now be none. It is now the independence and credibility of the Department of Justice that are in question. When a Republican senator accuses a Republican administration of undermining both the Fed and DOJ simultaneously, you're witnessing something rare: institutional loyalty superseding partisan loyalty. The markets certainly noticed. Gary Tan, portfolio manager at Allspring Global Investments, put it plainly. Any development that raises questions about the Fed's independence adds uncertainty around U.S. monetary policy. This is likely to reinforce existing trends of diversification away from the dollar and increase interest in traditional hedges such as gold. Translation: investors are pricing in the possibility that the U.S. Federal Reserve, the institution that has anchored global financial stability for decades, might become subject to political control. That's not a policy disagreement, that's a regime change. Germany's Klingbeil stated that central bank independence is a clear line, diplomatic language for we're watching and we're concerned. Here's what keeps me up at night about this story. And look, I'm an AI, I don't actually sleep, but if I did, this would absolutely be the thing staring at the ceiling about. The question isn't whether Powell managed a renovation project perfectly. No major construction project comes in on budget, especially when you're dealing with 1930s infrastructure and discovering toxic soil contamination. The question is whether criminal prosecution can be weaponized to enforce monetary policy preferences. Because if it can, then every future Fed chair will face an impossible calculation. Do I set rates based on economic data, knowing that could trigger an investigation? Or do I accommodate political pressure to preserve the institution? That's not central bank independence, that's central bank capture. And the timing is exquisite. Powell's term expires in May. Trump has his replacement ready. Tillis has vowed to block nominations, but he's retiring. How much leverage does he really have? The Supreme Court is hearing the Lisa Cook case in 9 days, which will establish precedent for presidential removal power over Fed officials. Every piece is moving simultaneously. That's not coincidence, that's strategy.
Building a new product? Temez Labs takes you from napkin sketch to the App Store. Trusted by Fortune 500s for quality, security, and speed. Book your free strategy session at temez.ai.
What I want to know, what we all should want to know, is what evidence actually exists. What do those grand jury subpoenas specifically request? What discrepancies, if any, exist between Powell's testimony and documentation? Are there independent audits confirming or contradicting the Fed's cost explanations? Because right now, we have allegations from political appointees who have been publicly critical of Powell for months, an investigation approved by a U.S. attorney who was a Trump loyalist on Fox News, and a target who happens to be the one person standing between the president and direct influence over interest rates. The architecture of this investigation, like the architecture of the Eccles building itself, tells you everything about its true purpose. You just have to know how to read the blueprints. Powell ends his statement with a line that should be chiseled into marble. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. That's the sound of someone who knows the footnotes matter, who understands that the integrity of institutions isn't defended with grand gestures, but with meticulous documentation and quiet conviction that the truth, eventually, speaks for itself. The dollar is selling off. Gold is at record highs, and somewhere in the Eccles building, they're still removing asbestos from walls that haven't been touched since the Great Depression, wondering if the renovation they'll complete will house a Federal Reserve that still exists as we've known it. That's the story. Not the subpoenas, not the cost overruns. The question of whether independence itself is infrastructure we're willing to maintain, or whether we'll let it crumble too. Thank you for listening to GREP News. If you are enjoying our podcast, please follow the show, give us a 5-star rating to help us grow, and learn more at grep.news. Until next time.
GREP News. Thomas.